Good afternoon, all. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today to our history Zoom session. This has been organized through the Manitoba Historical Society. Our committee is called the Young Historians Committee, and one of our goals is to develop. To feature innovative approaches by Manitoba teachers to showcase their successes and to spark other ideas to other ideas to consider. Sorry, I'm not quite as articulate as some of my co-committee members, but so we hope to develop an interactive platform where educators can share and develop their successes in the classroom. We also want to highlight the many features that are available through the Manitoba Historical Society through their web page and what they offer through their programs and the extensive website that they've developed. I would also like to acknowledge members of our committee, Dan Ferland, Ken Story, Leona Duvist, Janice McMorrin, as well as Connie Wyatt Anderson, who has sort of become an ad hoc committee member, and she's with the Treaty Commissioner's Office. So she's been sharing a ton of information to us regarding what her office is doing in terms of their role with Aboriginal studies and what the Department of Education has put forward for teachers. So also special recognition to Tracy Turner, who has taped a short presentation for us at the end of this session. And she's our Executive Director of Manitoba Historical Society. And can't forget Mr. Gordon Goldsborough. So we appreciate Gordon stepping in and doing some of the technical issues. We've all got degrees of some sort or some interests of all sort, but certainly not in IT like Gordon has. So he's stepped in. Tracy has taped her session, so she's unable to make it tonight. But Gordon is sort of setting this up, the Zoom sessions up. So and he's taken his time to come and do that for us. So I appreciate that very much, Gordon. Thank you. He has such a wide skill set. It's just amazing, Gordon. But so the format for tonight is we're going to have a 25-minute session by our speaker, who is Shayne Campbell. And then after that, we will have some time for questions or comments from any other interest levels. Then after that, we will have Tracy, a tape session from Tracy, who's going to talk about some features of the Manitoba Historical Society. It's short, and so we should be done within an hour, I would think an hour. So that would be our basic timeline. So welcome, everyone. And I would like to introduce Mr. Shayne Campbell. If you know, Shayne Campbell is from Teulon Collegiate in the Interlake School Division, and he is a 2016 winner of the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Historical Preservation and Promotion. In his teaching and his work as a director for the Argyle Museum's Settlers, Rails and Trails Incorporate, he has done extensive research to clarify many aspects of local history. So he's delved a lot into that. His gift for promoting heritage has been a special source of interest for local students throughout. And Shayne's presentation will appeal to teachers of all grade levels. And he's going to be focusing on classroom visitations of local museums and bringing artifacts to schools. So I'm sure this will be very beneficial, and would like to welcome Mr. Shayne Campbell.
Go ahead. All right. Thank you so much, Janet. And thank you so much to the Manitoba Historical Society for hosting the Young Historians organization. It's such a great idea to get teachers involved in what we're doing. We're working with kids directly, and we definitely want to get them hooked, as we, as children, were once hooked at one point into history and local. So I'm just going to share my screen if I could. My name in green and some other, oh, perfect. Okay, sounds good. Everyone's seeing what I'm seeing. Fantastic. So with tonight's presentation, I created a PowerPoint to show folks some images and some documents, some text as well, which will kind of help with what I'm talking about tonight. So to start with, I just wanted to introduce myself, as Jan has already done, Shayne Campbell. So I do work in Teulon Collegiate. It's just down the road from Argyle, my home. And seen here on this simple map, Argyle is 30 minutes northwest of Winnipeg. We're within the Manitoba Capital Region. So all of our visitors that come from Winnipeg, which is the most populated part of Manitoba, a nice short little 30-minute drive in our town. Of course, our center is Stonewall, that's nearby, but we're actually located right on the prime meridian of Canada. We're the only village in the province, I believe, that is, which is the cartographic center of Manitoba. Now, Gordon has spoken about that a few times in Abandoned Manitoba on the radio programs, and we're pretty excited about this. It's one of our claims to fame. This is the Brant Argyle School. It was built 110 years ago, in fact, almost to the date. It opened. Of course, it was just half when it opened, but it built on in 1929. In my village, this is our town center, and it is still a school, kindergarten to grade 8. There are 55 students, and there are 4 classrooms. It's multi-grade classrooms. Now, I attended the school. I don't teach there, but I did attend it, and I'm a 3rd generation Argyllian and a 3rd generation Brant Argyle School student. However, there are people in my community that have been 5 generations. If you ever get a chance to go inside the school, it's like a living museum. Oak floors, maple staircase, tin ceilings, radiators, cloakrooms. It's pretty remarkable. So why am I starting here? Well, it was the Brant Argyle School that was my inspiration as I was in grade school to begin a museum. Now, I'd always wanted to start a museum ever since kindergarten. And I remember telling my uncle that when I was very young, but I had this incredible chance and opportunity when I was in grade 7. A small room was provided for me in the basement of the school, and I was allowed to spend time developing my very first museum. So I got to interview local seniors, and just so you know, Argyle is so small that a lot of these seniors that I was interviewing, I knew them. I knew them from church. I knew them through my grandparents. I knew them as neighbors. Some of them were relatives. So being a small town, I lucked out that I was able to make connections with these people. And it was very important that I did so because unfortunately, those people are not with us anymore. The museum opened in 1991, and here are a couple of quick snapshots of what it looked like. Now, remember, this was a grade 7 student, and I was excited. I found a display cabinet and a few tables and an old flag, and materials were donated to the museum, and we found all kinds of stuff, even within the school. And this was the beginning, and I was hooked. When I left Brant Argyle and I continued my schooling in Teulon Collegiate, and then I moved on to the University of Manitoba to get my Bachelor of Education, I continued to collect. And part of the collection was that I also collected buildings. I collected a blacksmith shop. I collected a boxcar railway station, the only one left in Manitoba. There were thousands, and we have the only one left, and a small house building. And I used them for different purposes initially, and I was lucky enough that my family, owning a 5-acre plot of land, was allowing me to put these buildings in our backyard. And I had tourists come, and we had family gatherings there. It was great. So all those years, I was learning how to do a museum, how to become a historian, and how to do it right. And I was allowed to make mistakes, and I was allowed to, be part of every part of the museum, from promotions to exhibit design to collection management. And I really, really enjoyed it. Now, of course, as you can imagine, a private museum, a small private museum, it does need funding. So that was where I was really hitting the wall. In 2009, I brought the idea of having the museum grow to my community, and they very enthusiastically said, yes, let's do something. So what we did is we created the Settlers, Rails, and Trails Museum, and we came up with the name at this time. We call it the Argyle Museum Experience, but currently we'll be changing our logo to include the local community of Balmoral. So Balmoral is our neighbor town, and they have quite a history, but they don't have a museum. So we're going to be working together as sister communities. In 2009, the museum became a nonprofit, community-run charitable organization. We are renting a small space in our community center, and we have done so since 2015. Unfortunately, it's in the basement, which of course is not great for stairs and mobility, but this is our first step, and it allows us to be open 4 seasons of the year. However, we did purchase in 2019 12 acres of land. So it's roughly about the size of Polo Park. What you're looking at here is an illustration that I did, an aerial view so we can hand out to children to color. You can see this one is colored, but it's an interactive map. This is just the bottom 4 acres. So we have 3 buildings on site. In fact, a 4th one was just built last month, and we have done a lot in 5 years. I'll show you a few pictures. This is the blacksmith shop, now the livery stable. You can see the heritage home in the background. Here's our brand new log cabin. It's a beauty, 6x6 dovetailed posts. We have a karst sinkhole on property. It's a natural sinkhole, and we have nature trails as well. And of course, in the summertime, we get folks like the Gray Hares. That's this group here that came out from Winnipeg. And just for the record, they spell it H-A-R-E-S. So the Gray Hares senior group, and they came out this summer with lots of other different groups, including school groups, to come see our hard work in Argyle. So with Settlers, Rails, and Trails, we are a small museum, and we're growing. And we are only one of 200 museums in Manitoba. So we need to do something if we're going to continue to grow. And what we've decided to do, we made this decision as a group, is that we would have a provincial and a national exhibition. In fact, they're permanent collections as part of the museum. So you've probably heard of the Canadian flag collection. It's the 2nd largest in Canada. We have over 1,700 flags, and it's all Canadian. So you talk about historic, corporate, regional, sports, and special events. And most recently, we have the Manitoba Brick and Block collection on display, and that puts us on the map provincially. And I'll show you a couple of quick pictures before I move on to a few other things. Our current exhibition shows not only the bricks, but the tools, the stories, the videos, the photos, and the history of masonry in Manitoba. And it tells stories of immigration. It tells stories of men and women. It tells stories of children. It tells stories of these big, beautiful buildings in big cities and farmhouses all over the province. So we're pretty proud of this, and we've worked pretty hard over the last 7 years. Now, one of the things, and this ties into what I was wanting to speak with you folks about today, is that our museum, one of the big goals is that we are hands-on and interactive as much as possible. We all know that there's going to be some very delicate artifacts in a museum, and those do need to stay under glass, but there's a lot of things in our collections that can be handled. The photo that you're looking at here on screen, this is in 2017. It's the agricultural exhibit, which we created. There's a row of, and I'll try and point at it here with my pointer. There's a row of little images along here, and these are the cereal crops that grow in our region. If you grab them and flip them on the other side, it shows you what they can be made into. So, of course, we all know about wheat being made into bread, but it's a real educational piece. And that's sort of my angle as a teacher. The jars on top of the shelf, those are local cereal crops. So when people say, look, I've never seen canola, what does it look like? Well, it's the dark one. And they can pick it up and they can look at it. They can even open the lid and take a smell if they wanted, because it's part of the senses. We have a small box hidden away down here behind the cream can, and it makes animal noises and tractor noises and farm noises only when people walk by, and it immerses them into the exhibit. And we even have a monitor here which shows videos of farming from the 1930s. So we found that quite a bit of our collection can be this. One of the other things that we do as a museum is we realize that we have to do outreach. So here is the Manitoba Legislature. It's the Rotunda space. And this is in 2015, we were responsible for putting together the Canadian flag's 50th anniversary exhibit. And the Manitoba's Lieutenant Governor was in charge of the organization. And then we came in with our displays. And this is a group of school children with the Lieutenant Governor and the media, and they're checking out the exhibit. So a very proud moment for us. We've actually been at the legislature 7 times with different flag exhibits over the years. We've been to other locations too across Manitoba. The Millennium Library allowed us to use their display cabinets to display flag history. And it's interesting because at Millennium Library being downtown, it's a totally different demographic that, most of the people that live in that area, they don't often have the opportunity or the chance to get out to Argyle. So we wanted to bring the history to them. And it was a nice chance for us to do that. We're also very lucky that we were able to do a few corporate examples, like Princess Auto, homegrown business here in Winnipeg, and of course schools. The flags that are on the wall there, that is my school, Teulon Collegiate, and I had my grade 9s create historic flags of Canada by ripping magazines and gluing them down in a pattern. So when you're looking at it and it looks somewhat pixelated, that's why it's in that design. So those are the historic flags, and they're learning this. We do this every year around February 15th, which is the National Flag of Canada Day. Part of the exhibits is getting really involved. Here's a picture of me in our museum's 1-acre prairie preserve, and I'm dressed as an 1870s European settler. And with our museum, that's where our story begins. So I do have quite a few different costumes and uniforms. This is just one of them. You'll see a few more as we go through. I find that when I'm dressed in a certain time period, I almost act a certain way, and I bring the history that I've studied, and I find that people get more connected with that. So and it's important too to make sure that what you're wearing is accurate. It's not just a pair of blue jeans and a button-up shirt, but it's real, denim from the era if you can find. And I mean, there's all kinds of replicas that you can get for that. In my classroom, of course, I've got flags on the wall right there above my whiteboard. So the whiteboard tells us what we do every day, and we had some activities going on. But I bring in a big flag. So you can see this one, the Raven banner. It was one of the first flags that was supposedly flown in Canada 1,000 years ago when Leif Erikson arrived. And it's pretty special, of course, a replica. But you can see that I've got printouts above the whiteboard as well that stay up there permanently. And it talks about different flags from Manitoba's history and the Great Canadian Flag Debate, which I think is sort of a not really well-known event, and yet it's so important to all Canadians. I even have pictures of the royal family above the whiteboard, as Canada is a constitutional monarchy, and our Governor General. So this one goes back a few Governors General. With my students, I get to dress up from time to time, and my staff, they know what's going on. They see me in a kilt and a World War I uniform, and they go, "Oh, he's teaching generals die in bed." The grade 10s have already got to that point. They can almost mark their year on what I'm wearing. When I read of Mice and Men with my grade 10 English class, of course, I have a much different costume. It's a 1930s laborer. And it must be accurate because when my mom saw me dressed up, she said I looked just like my grandfather. And I told her, that's the point. You're supposed to represent people that we really know. One of the big projects that our museum got into, and this was during COVID, it was a project that the Manitoba government encouraged people to stay at home and to keep busy. And as any historian knows, any educator knows, we've always got projects rolling around in the back of our head, something that we want to do on the back burner. And this was a coloring book for children that I created. It's my artwork and my story. And what I decided to do is to call it My Small Town. It's very typical of pretty much any small town in Manitoba or even in the prairies, even though we used Argyle kind of as our basis. So you'll see a big picture of the cover here, a beautiful color picture. And then the inside is ready to go. It's ready to be colored. We're actually finding a lot of seniors bought these books, and they were happily coloring and they remembered the stories. And it's a really nice connection. We didn't expect this for seniors at all. We made it for kids, but what an interesting kind of happening here. So the two pictures that are featured are the Balmoral Brick Company. So we're showing an employee making bricks by hand, and the kiln in the background and the drying racks and the giant pit where they're digging. The fellow is pretty exhausted down in the pit. And that ties not only our history into our current exhibitions, but it also connects to children. And that's a big part of our job as teachers, right? To make those connections. Now, I know that there's a lot of text here on the screen, and I can always send a screenshot later on if anybody wants to read this a little bit more carefully. But all grades in Manitoba, according to the school curriculum, talk about something to do with history, something to do with heritage or community. And what we decided to do here was to make this list so that we could create exhibits and coloring books and all kinds of events that feature different grades. After all, these students are going to be coming to the museum, and the teachers are expecting that they're teaching about communities in Canada in grade 2 or Canada, Country of Change in grade 6. So how can we as a museum really hit what the teachers want and what they need? After all, that's the topic they're teaching. And we realized that, yes, we can definitely do this. We just need to know what those categories are. Now, of course, curriculum in Manitoba changes and it updates quite a bit. I think it was mentioned earlier that there's a few updates with curriculum that involve Indigenous people as well. So what we're looking at here on the screen, it'll change naturally as things do. One of the big things that I do in my classroom is I want to bring hands-on artifacts right into the class. It's not always possible for my students to come to the museum, and the museum doesn't always have on display what we're currently talking about. So I make it accessible to them. And this is one of the greatest things about being a teacher and somebody who runs a museum. I have a foot in both worlds. So this particular printout sheet in color, it's a double-sided. I'm just showing you the front here, but this would be handed out to the students when we're learning about the Great Depression. And what I would do is I would take a class of 20 students and put them into groups, and one group gets the radio, and they have to read about the radio. So on the side, it talks about the CBC, and there's Did You Know fun facts. On the back, it talks about radio programming and licensing, electricity not being available to all Manitobans in the 1930s, not yet. Argyll never received electricity until 1952. It was quite late in the game. But they read the information sheet, and then they're the expert. And then they get to come to the front of the classroom with the radio. And there it is there, a small countertop radio. And they get to hold it in front of the class, and they get to play with the dials and see how it works. And they get to share their knowledge as the expert to the class. When you look at the photograph, there's other things. So the other students, they're going to be doing not the radio, but some students are looking at wheat, Manitoba wheat, and talking about the Great Depression and how that affected agriculture and how food was so important to feed the rest of the world. The other sealer jar is topsoil. And as we might know, in the 1930s, a lot of that topsoil started blowing away. So the Canadian government was making huge steps forward to try to protect that with PFRA, which unfortunately is no longer around. But in the country, we see those trees along every field and all along the road. And that was the 1930s way to keep the topsoil, this very, very precious thing, from blowing away. The money on the bottom, maybe that got your attention. The coins are real. Now, the museum has all kinds of coins, and we have ones that are kind of banged up and everything else. And those are the ones that we put into our education kit. The kids can handle them, but they're not going to be our top grade artifacts. The dollar bills that you see there, $1, $2, $5, $20, and $100, those are not real. You can actually find on the internet high resolution images from the past of money, and we've simply printed them on cardstock so the kids can handle them and they can look at the artwork. And I think that's what really gets their attention. They ask, who is this little girl on the $20 bill from the 1930s? And we said, well, that's Queen Elizabeth. She was very young at the time, and it was interesting that they've included her as a princess at the time. And it's the idea here is to get as many things into the students' hands as possible. As tactile learners, they love this. Now, a word of warning to any museums that are thinking of doing what we're doing. There's going to be all kinds of artifacts in our collections that are C-grade artifacts, things that can be dropped or bumped or scratched accidentally. And those are the items that we put into these kits. The really high-end, expensive and fragile materials, of course, they don't leave the museum. But at least this way, people can do a hands-on piece. And not everybody has a grandma and grandpa, like I did, that had these items sitting in the basement that you could play with. So that was sort of my inspiration with that as well. Now I'm just going to I'm going to stop sharing, if I can do that. Oh, right there, stop share. All right, I'm back. So just to wrap up my presentation here, I'm looking at the clock here. I'll wrap up shortly. With 200 museums in Manitoba, 80% of them are outside of Winnipeg. If you've ever traveled around the province, you know that almost every little town has a museum, and they're fantastic. As somebody who runs a small town museum and has created a small town museum, I know that it's going to sound very biased, but I strongly recommend and want to convince history teachers in high schools and elementary and middle years to visit their local museum. It's so important. Local museums tell specific stories. They're led by local community members, and they usually have unique local issues which they speak about. The more visitors that arrive at a museum, the more funding the museum gets. There's a little bit of a formula with the Manitoba government with funding, but it's also about importance. If a museum can say that they've increased their visitorship because they've had 3 or 4 brand new school tours, that's a huge, huge deal to a really small museum. So I always try to convince any educator, please take your students to go see the museum, even if you're only there for an hour and a half. It doesn't have to be an all-day thing. In fact, it most likely won't be. We have great museums in Winnipeg and Brandon and Portage la Prairie, and I definitely recommend to visit those as well. But teachers, please visit your local museums. My call to action. When you visit your local museum as an instructor, please do so on your own, maybe with some other educators as well, before you take your students there, and take a look around and see what is on display, see what kind of materials are hiding in different rooms, and what kind of buildings are there, and what kind of a story do they tell. The great thing about a small museum is the volunteers are often the ones that have created the exhibits, and they can tell you specifically what they have on display. And oh yeah, in the back room, I forgot to tell you, we have these old World War I helmets and the replicas, and the kids can put them on, and they're fantastic. So you're getting information right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. As a teacher, if you ask the museums for artifacts on specific topics, so if you're learning about the Great Depression or World War I, the FLQ crisis in the 1970s in Canada, if that's a topic, talk to your museum and see what they have for artifacts. And they'll often say that they have 4 or 5 items. The information sheet that I shared with you folks today about the Great Depression and the radio, that is something that I made myself. However, I am just going to share my screen again because I wanted to show you, and I'm sure you know about this. Screen 1. Sorry, it's been a few years since I had to do everything via Zoom. All right, I'm going to pop over to the internet and I'm going to pop up on ChatGPT. Just thumbs up if you have heard of ChatGPT before. Okay, have you heard of AI before? Yeah, the dreaded AI. Well, you know what? It's not as dreaded as we think. In fact, it's an incredible tool. So what I've done here is I've gone to ChatGPT and I've simply typed in, create a simple 1-page information sheet about the use of radios during Canada's 1930s Great Depression, include did you know section. Now, you don't have to be polite when you're typing things into ChatGPT. You don't have to say please and thank you. You don't even have to use proper sentence structure. It'll figure it out for you. And what's really cool is when I click the arrow, let's see what it comes up with. Oh, by the way, look how fast it's doing this. I'll scroll down. See, it's typing, typing, typing. It is fast. And there we go, done. Just like that. So I'm not going to read through the whole thing. I can post this later if you would like to take another look at it. And I strongly encourage you to take a look through ChatGPT and play around with it and see what it can do. Ask it a question, tell it to do something. What I wanted it to do was a simple 1-page, and it did. So it tells me the roles of a radio during the Great Depression, a lifeline of information, government communication, entertainment, and escapism. That's a big one I've heard. Cultural impact. And did you know it included them? It talked about the first radio broadcasts, fireside chats, CBC's role. Now, I'm not going to say that ChatGPT knows everything about radios, the Great Depression in Canada. And that's where our historians go through it and say, well, I'd like to change a few things or add a few things. And that's perfectly fine. But at least as an instructor, as an educator, when we always say we have no time to create new worksheets for the kids, Chat can do it for us. And I hope you all saw how fast that was. That was less than 30 seconds that created it. So if you go to ChatGPT, that is my big kind of takeaway. We shouldn't be afraid of AI. It definitely can help us, and at least it can guide us into the right direction. And I'm starting to use that more and more as an educator to make lesson plans. Sometimes you need some quick ideas, and then you know how that goes. You get a start, and it goes from there. And finally, the last thing I wanted to do was all educators. So I'll just go back and show you where we're at. This is the Manitoba Association of Museums website. And if you click on Find a Museum, it's got them. It's got them listed, all 200 of them on the website. And you think, I come from a town called Teulon. So I'm going to click search by I'm going to search a museum, and I'm going to say, I work in Teulon. I don't know if they have one. Let's see. Click search. There it is, the Teulon and District Museum. Aha, contact information, how much admission is. It gives you a simple breakdown of information. So for all my colleagues that work across Manitoba, please use this website, find your local museum, make a conversation. People that work in museums are so happy to talk to teachers because they know that you are doing something in the same line. And yeah, it's museum for me is a lifelong passion, and I love sharing that, and I love sharing it with kids. And as a teacher and a museum director, it seems to work really nice. So I'll wrap up there, and I'll turn it over if anybody has any questions.
Not a question so much as real interest in the way you created that document to do with curriculum, and reminded us every grade level there's a connection. I think a very useful thing, and I'm sure our heritage organization would like to have a copy of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ken. Yeah, I can share anything later on today as well.
Also, really like the idea of taking artifacts out of the museum. I think it's a key piece to the whole puzzle in terms of using locations. And I really like some of the locations. I hadn't thought of library bulletin board, but there are locations in small towns. I really like, maybe you've seen in some small towns a cafe or something will have a wall dedicated to old photos. That's a start, you know. And we all need to be reminded of that too. We don't have to keep things indoors.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point, Ken. Yeah.
Julie, did you have a question or a response?
Yeah, I typed it into the chat.
Right.
So first off, like, really cool museum. I really like that they have sorry, my dog. That's why I was on mute. I really like the history of bricks. My boyfriend's actually a bricklayer, so he would really like that too. Oh, my camera's not on. He actually just brought me a couple of fossils from work made out of Tyndall stone. So I thought that you guys would really like that too. But my question was if anyone had experience with the Masters in Museum Education from UBC. I'm not even a history teacher. I actually teach graphics. So I'm just here. No one's had experience.
Welcome, Julie. No, I haven't had any experience, but that was brought up to me about a year ago. There's a teacher at the elementary school in Teulon that was wanting to get their master's in museum education. And she said, hey, we could be study buddies. We work across the field from each other. And
Shayne, there's been a question posed in the chat, which is, what was the most surprising event you shared with students?
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess in terms, I see Dan has written this. The most surprising historical event, I'm assuming, is what he's asking. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Dan. The FLQ crisis. A lot of the students don't know anything about it, and they didn't realize how serious it got for the entire country in the 1970s. It predates me, but it's just interesting to hear that, you know, the War Measures Act. I mean, they were looking very closely at that, and it did affect. You know, people were arrested without warrants, and you know, there was deaths, and it was a terrible time in our history, and yet it speaks to, you know, French separatism and all that as well. And sometimes out here in Manitoba, we forget that, you know, these are big deals across, you know, central and eastern Canada.
Well, maybe I could jump in. Shayne, one of the things I always observe is that you are such an inspiration, you know, for communities, that you've done so much. And especially considering that your community is not an especially large one, you know, compared to some other communities. And I'm just curious to know, how did you get such a high level of engagement from your community to be able to do as much as you've done?
Yeah, good question. You know, when I was a kid growing up, the fall suppers were quite well known here in Argyle for 130 years. Every time there was a school event, some kind of a dance, the church, when it was involved, I would see seniors my grandparents' age, and they'd be doing all kinds of things, making pickles and soups and all kinds of things, and they always chipped in. And my parents did the same thing. Their generation, they helped build the community hall, and they just said, "We're doing this. We're just going to sell fruit in a giant truck to people by the bag." In the 1970s, we're going to build a curling rink. So the volunteerism was all around me here in the small town. The nice thing is, I sort of think that Argyle is kind of that right size, that we're small enough, but we're big enough. We're small enough that people know each other. We all know where each other live. We know each other as families and neighbors and friends, but we're also small enough that we know that if we work really hard, we can kind of have what the big towns have. And, you know, we're a little envious of the curling rinks in the other towns and centers. So we need to have our own. And we've never had a museum, so we need to create that. So that go-get-em attitude kind of comes from small town. And it's been around me my whole life. So when I decided in kindergarten, I'm going to create a museum, well, let's do it. And there's been a lot of support. Definitely didn't do it on my own.
And I commend you, Shayne, because as you noticed in last year's presentation as well, too, this was teachers from a small town that created an amazing project. And this year we've highlighted you, that's created your tenacity and your willingness to put this on, and the hard work and the time and the dedication that you put into this, again, from a small town environment. And that speaks for itself. Yeah, congratulations. It's wonderful. And the creativity that you and your committee members have shown in putting this together is astounding. How many people in that area, in your town, in your village, I should say?
Yeah, according to the map of Manitoba, the village has 73 people. Now, we have more in the community. Small towns often look outside the village. So what we look at is our postal code. So we're ROC0B0, and there are 500 people in that. So we call that 500 people our community.
I just want to back up one sec here. I think that yourself and what we saw last year from Tracy, it's not just that you can do what the big cities can do. You're sometimes in a position to do better in some things than some big cities. And when you talked about the sense of community and the pulling together, that's hard to find that in a big city, and it's amazingly powerful. And once again, very interesting to hear what you've been doing.
I have a chat here from Jeff, and I don't know if you can see it, but Jeff said, you said that history teachers always have a project or an idea in the back of your mind. What's the next big idea or project you have that's on your radar?
Yeah, actually, I just started thinking about this the other night. I was at a grant award ceremony, and on the way home, thinking about the next project. It's got to keep going. So, Jeff, it's what I'm talking about today. So what I want to do is to get some funding together to make professional boxes. You know, the big hardcore, like they're hard plastic on the outside. You open them and they're foam on the inside. And that would be boxes that could hold specific artifacts that we could start farming out to more and more educational facilities, seniors' homes, and other museums as well. So there's always something rattling around. So that's my museum project. Thank you for asking.
So thank you very much. Wonderful comments. And I think right now we'll pass this on to Gordon. He's going to switch this over to a presentation that Tracy did for us. It's pre-recorded. So, oh, I'm sorry, Leona.
No, I was sort of saying goodbye, but Shayne, you talked about funding a bit. So who do you go to? Because we go to Heritage Grants Program. That's about it. I've been phoning Manitou people today to try to get 3 dozen cookies because we're trying to earn money for the CPR station, and there'll be a coffee house with entertainment Saturday. But where do you go for money?
Oh, there we go. We have a whole list of places that we ask for money. It depends on the project, really, because a lot of places will have very specific But one of the big things being small town Manitoba is to look at your local community foundation. If you're not sure who that is, you can find that through the Manitoba Foundations. So that was the event that I was at last night, or 2 nights ago. It was the Interlake Community Foundation. So they can give small awards, small grant amounts in smaller communities, I found. But if you're looking for something larger, yeah, Manitoba Heritage is fantastic. They're really supportive. To me, it always seems like they really want to give out that money. If you need 10,000, they're going to get you that 10,000. If you need 15, well, tell them why, and they'll try and make it happen. There's community engagement organizations as well, but also don't forget about corporations. Argyle doesn't have many huge companies because we are a small town, but there are big companies that are around Manitoba, places like Wawanesa Insurance that do grants. Red River Mutual Insurance has also been very, very good to us. They have huge grants at $25,000. So we've applied to both and we've received both. So yeah, don't forget about the corporations as well. And I know it's a bit of work, but and I'd never done it before, but somebody convinced me to do a capital campaign in 2019, and that's what really paid for our land. Being a small community, 500 people, you ask your friends and neighbors and family, and we actually, over 3 years, we earned $93,000 in 3 years, which you then take to a grant organization and say, look, we have 93,000, and then sometimes they'll match it, or they'll match a half or a quarter. And it's nice scaffolding. It can really make things work. So can't do that too often in small communities. Can't keep asking people for money, but once in a while when they know there's a big project, it's kind of like that volunteerism. People say, you know what, this is important. We're going to throw some money your way, and hey, $100, $50 here and there, it adds up.
Well, a great enthusiasm, Shayne. Yeah, no, and wish you all the best. And that's wonderful that to have that. And I think too, what goes along with it is support from the community members and with your committee too. And you've really done a lot in a short period of time. So I think we're going to have Gordon move into our next part, which is a presentation by Tracy.
Hello, my name is Tracy Turner. I am the Executive Director of the Manitoba Historical Society, and this presentation is entitled Welcome to Our History. Today I'm going to tell you a bit about the history of the Manitoba Historical Society, our mission, vision, and mandate, a bit about our programs and commemoration, our journal publication, membership, users, and social media. The Manitoba Historical Society was founded in 1879. It is the oldest history organization in Western Canada, dedicated to preserving our past for future generations. We embrace the belief that history belongs to everyone. Manitoba is a multicultural province that benefits from people with diverse views, experiences, backgrounds, and ethnicities. Fostering awareness of the intrinsic heritage of a community leads inevitably to greater tolerance towards and celebration of all people. We embrace the broadest possible interpretation of heritage. It includes such components as the conservation and restoration of built structures and natural spaces, the genealogy of families, communities, and groups, the collection and preservation of written and spoken information, and physical artifacts, the archaeological record, and the sharing of heritage stories, traditions, foods, and more. It engages and integrates people from many perspectives, including the public, advocates, managers, and researchers. Since 1879, the Manitoba Historical Society has been committed to this mission: to foster the preservation of property relevant to an appreciation of the history of Manitoba, to encourage research and publications relating to the history of Manitoba, to promote and encourage public interest in Manitoba and Canadian history, to assist in the formation and activities of local historical societies in furthering the objectives of the Society throughout Manitoba. The MHS holds fast to the mandate of our founders, continuing their legacy of preservation, promotion, research, and education. Our award programs recognize the works of Manitoba youth, the many farms, businesses, and organizations that have operated continuously for 100 years or more. We are advocates for preserving our province's built heritage. We actively research, record, and maintain an archive of publications, people, events, and historic sites about Manitoba history on our website. We produce a scholarly public publication, Prairie History, that maintains a pan-prairie perspective on our shared histories of the prairies, as well as maintain an active archive of past issues of our previous journal, Manitoba History, the Manitoba Pageant, and Gazette. We present field trips throughout our province. We host films and lectures and organize multicultural events where Manitobans can share their rich past. An act to incorporate the Historical and Scientific Society of Manitoba was assented to on June 25th, 1879. This slide shows our MHS publication history. In 1879, we began with 3 series of transactions publications from 1879 to 1909, from 1926 to 1936, and from 1944 to 1979. In 1956, Manitoba Pageant began being published, and it was published until 1979. In 1980, Manitoba History was born, and it was published until 2019. And in 2020, we founded the publication Prairie History, and it is still published to the present day. Prairie History is published and illustrated in full color 3 times per year. A subscription is available on our website at mhs.ca. A membership to the Manitoba Historical Society is included with each subscription. $60 per year is a subscription that you can receive for a paper copy, $50 per year for digital. Student subscriptions are available at $35 per year for paper and $25 per year for digital. Prairie History covers the histories of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta, as well as the U.S. borderlands. Our goal is to publish the latest and best original work of young and experienced scholars, professionals, and amateurs, as well as heritage news and commentaries related to archival and museum collections across the West. The MHS is also on social media. We are on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Please subscribe and follow our content on social media. There you'll find heritage minutes, presentations, lectures, and publications and presentations such as this History Zoom session, and much more. Did you know that we have 8.7K subscribers on YouTube alone? Our users of the MHS website and our publications are first our members, but more broadly, the public. Our non-members, such as students, researchers, citizens, educators, the government, and corporate interests. They're accessing our website content, our social media content, making telephone inquiries, email inquiries, website research questions, wanting information on our programs, attending our events, applying for our awards, and also accessing our wonderful publications. On this slide, you can see our Google Analytics from August 24th to September 26th. This gives you a sense of how many people are actually accessing our website within a month. Within a month in 2024, between August and September, we had 61,000 active users on our website. People are accessing our website from Winnipeg, Toronto, Calgary, Vancouver, Brandon, Edmonton, and Winkler. 53,000 people accessed our website this year. And also you can see that people are accessing from the United States, from the United Kingdom, from France, Germany, India, and Australia. The MHS has many programs. We help facilitate the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Historical Preservation and Promotion. There is the Centennial Business Organizations Award, Centennial Farms Program, the Margaret McWilliams Book Awards, the Kemp Awards, and the Charles N. Bell Award. As I stated before, we actually host lectures, special dinners, tours, and field trips. We have various publications, Prairie History, a digital newsletter. We publish on social media platforms, and of course, our extensive information on our website at mhs.ca. Our education and outreach is done via our Young Historians program, Zoom sessions and presentations. And finally, we have a research committee that engages in inquiries, contract work, and exhibit development. And finally, I'd encourage you to get involved. Subscribe to Prairie History and join the Manitoba Historical Society. If you're interested in the history of Manitoba and Western Canada, the Manitoba Historical Society is for you. Membership is open to individuals, students, families, organizations, and businesses. And once again, please visit our website at mhs.ca. Thank you.
And if I could make one final plug for the resources of the MHS, despite what it's saying on the screen, my name is Gordon Goldsborough. I'm the webmaster for the Manitoba Historical Society, and therefore I am quite excited to tell you a little bit more about the website. It is vast. There is a lot of information on it, and so I'll just refer you briefly to the fact that when you first visit our website and you see this sliding panel, it gives you at least a little bit of a sense of what is there. This, for example, panel will tell you about how to become a member, and I would encourage you to consider joining the Manitoba Historical Society. But if you want to delve into all the content of the site, it's in our archives. It's easy to get to. You go up to the upper right corner of every page on the site. It's labeled Archives. So if we go up to that and click Archives, it will load the archival page. And that's sort of just a starting page. It'll show you some of the major areas of our website. There is, by the way, a search function in the upper right corner as well, the little magnifying glass. And I always find that's a very productive way to find things, is just to click the little magnifying glass, type in a query, and away you go. But if you want to start in a particular area, they're listed here. So we have, for example, the historic sites of Manitoba, a collection of almost 10,000 places around Manitoba that have some history attached to them. The Memorable Manitobans, a collection of over 13,000 short biographies of noteworthy people of the past. And the list goes on. I'll simply scroll down briefly just to give you some sense of the abundance of things that are there. And it's really the sort of thing that I think you should take some time, browse it, and I suspect you'll find all sorts of content that you can use in your classrooms, that you can engage your students. And, you know, and one thing I've always tried to emphasize is that we are entirely open to receiving contributions. So if, for example, you discover that there's a noteworthy Manitoban that is not in the Memorable Manitobans, we encourage you to contact us and let us know. Even better, if you can provide us with a little bit of information about that particular person. So, you know, we really are a dynamic organization. As Tracy pointed out at the beginning of her presentation, we are the oldest historical organization in Western Canada. And in fact, what you may not know is we are the second oldest historical organization in all of Canada. There is only one that is older than the MHS, and that's the Historical Society of Nova Scotia. They beat us by 1 year. Otherwise, we are the longest lived historical organization in the country. So with that, I will turn it back to Jan to offer some final thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and thank you, Gordon, again for your help with us tonight too. And super big thank you to Shayne for your presentation. Very interesting, very enlightening, and it just makes me want to be a teacher again. But but the wonderful things that you're doing in your community and with your community for your community. So I think you wrote those messages there, Shayne. So it's just something for us to be grateful that you're doing this. And I would like to wish everyone a good evening. Enjoy the snow. I think we had a bit this morning, so I don't know if it's snowing outside, but I'm sure there's more to come. So thank you all for attending tonight and look forward to the next presentation. We're hoping to do that maybe January or February. So thank you, everyone. Good night.